And we are live with our 42nd episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome to 2019. I guess this is season 2 of Absolute AppSec. We're excited to be back. We've got a lot planned for this year. We're excited for the episode today. There's all things look bright in application security or dark, depending on your viewpoint, right? Half glass empty, half glass full kind of person. But we're excited. Thanks for joining us. We've got the team from Segment with us tonight. There's a lot that we want to get to and to talk about. But yeah, welcome back, right?
Yeah, it's been a few weeks. It's always weird trying to get back into the groove after a few weeks of not doing anything, right? Doesn't matter if it's a podcast or just whatever. Like if you don't do something for a few weeks, it can be a bit difficult to get back into it. But I think we're going to be good. We got the whole Segment team here. Parts of the Segment team here to talk about a few interesting things. There are a couple things to mention. One is that AppSec California is occurring here in just a couple weeks. So if you are in the California area, or if for some reason you can now just in 2 weeks book your travel, then sure, you should definitely go. But a good reminder that AppSec Cali is occurring in a couple weeks. And that Seth and I are also giving training during the training days there. So that's January 21st and 22nd. And the conference, I think, is 23rd, 24th.
I think it's training is 22nd, 23rd.
It was a good try there, Ken, but not quite.
The training is 22nd, 23rd. Conference is 24th, 25th.
Yep. And then anyone still needs tickets, you can use the code OWASP25 off for the conference. That doesn't work for the training, but if you're still buying a conference ticket, that'll get you a little discount.
So that was OWASP25 off?
Yep.
Perfect.
And I think the OWASP is all caps. I'm not sure if that actually matters for Eventbrite or not, but yeah, OWASP25 lowercase off.
Oh, cool. Yeah, we'll put that out there, at least on our Slack channels and everything else. Yeah, it'd be good to meet up with everyone out at AppSec Cali or any place else, obviously. For the training, right, Ken, that's Tuesday, Thursday. I think that's 2 weeks from today, actually, is when we kick that off.
Oh, yeah. And you'd think I'd know the dates, considering we're giving training. But yeah, 2 weeks from now on the head. So I'm looking forward to it because the weather here sucks. And also, it's an awesome conference, to be very clear. It's an awesome conference. Before we go into, and Leaf is part of that. David, I believe you're part of that as well.
Yep. We'll both be speaking. I help organize for it. So yeah, we'll both be down there. I think some other people from the Segment team will be down there, and it sounds like a lot of previous podcast guests will be there as well. So should be fun.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's going to be like meeting up with everyone. Pretty excited.
Yeah, we may have to have an Absolute AppSec, night out or something, right? Drinks. I don't know. We'll figure something out. We'll put it out there to all the guests and see who's available.
Cool. So I guess we'll dig right into it. So before we get into Leaf and David's backstory, we are actually going to have Shil Russell, and I hope I'm saying your name correctly, from the Segment engineering team, from SRE specifically, discuss a little bit about DNS rebinding. So first of all, Ashil, say hi.
Hello.
So, and hopefully the camera switches back. We have this weird thing with Hangouts where sometimes the camera doesn't switch automatically, but we'll figure it out. So the first thing we want to get into is have you discuss the concept of SSRF DNS, not SSRF, just SSRF DNS rebinding. I think we've talked about SSRF on this episode on this podcast quite a bit. So yeah, the concept of SSRFs and DNS rebinding, and then the solution that you've worked up to sort of help with that.
Sure thing. So we have quite a unique problem at Segment, I'd say, where we're connecting one half of the internet to the other, and that involves a lot of public connections to APIs that we have no control over. And we're also sending data that is not ours. We're carrying our customers' data throughout our infrastructure and to public destinations. And so there's a lot of opportunities for our own system to be exploited in ways that it was not intended to. And this is especially true on the very last mile of our pipeline, which we call integrations, and which are the service that is sending the data to tools like Google Analytics or Mixpanel, or like more raw versions like just simple webhooks or Amazon Kinesis. And obviously, customers can input their own configuration there because they have their own endpoint that they want to route the data to, their own account. And so we don't have much control or ways to verify that those endpoints are legit. However, what we know is that they have to be public endpoints. So we don't want a malicious individual to like attempt to tap our own internal services from a webhook that would have been designed to like be rerouted to internal addresses. And so as we're in a startup a couple of years ago, the initial solution we had to this was do a DNS resolution, check out the address that you get, and then verify that it falls within, that it doesn't fall within a couple of private IP ranges that we use. And if that's the case, then we allow the request to go through. Now, this is a typical attack vector for DNS rebinding, because there's a race condition between when you do the first resolution and then you validate, and the actual connection that is going to be employed to serve the request. Those might be completely different. So what we came up with is, but basically the main thing that you want to do here is ensure that the address that you verify is also the one that you're going to use to send the request. And this is often made complicated by like software abstractions, because you're going to have the actual DNS resolution and TCP connection that the requests are going to go through are going to be very like decoupled in multiple layers away from the actual application that is sending the request. So you have the connection pooling, HTTP client library, maybe some like third-party libraries that you use on top of this because they have their own SDK to interact and like support authentication and stuff like this. So it becomes really hard to actually get to the bottom of the stack where you want to do this verification. And especially in technologies like JavaScript, which we use for this part of the stack. And so we first implemented a solution for Golang, which is this like major, like the main programming language that we use. And in Go, you have this concept of a dialer, which is the abstraction to establish network connections. So what we did is we modified, like we introduced a wrapper of the dial function that is used that handles both the verification of the IP that is going, it handles the resolution of the address, verification of the IP, and establishment of the connection. So because all the things happen at the same layer, then there's no risk anymore to have the request being sent over a connection that we have not verified. It also has performance improvements over a solution where you check on every request, because now once you've established a connection, it's not going to be rerouted anywhere else until it's closed, which means every request you're going to send over this connection doesn't need to be verified anymore. You have validated that this link was safe. Now, this is a Go solution that we have in a package and we're going to open source soon. However, it doesn't work in the use case of JavaScript, for example, because now it's a different programming language. You need a JavaScript version of that to integrate with the services. Or the solution that we came up with is to actually build a kind of like a container, a new form of container runtime that is going to run a JavaScript application. And it will intercept every outgoing connections, reroute it to a local server, and decode all the outgoing requests, inspect where they were intended to be routed to, and then apply this DNS binding protection logic on the way out.
So is it language agnostic in the sense that it's just like the protection mechanism for the container itself, like the networking bit for the container?
Exactly. So basically, there's a bunch of IP table routes that ensure that all outbound traffic is going to get rerouted to a local server. The local server is capturing the connection, pretending to be the remote endpoint, but and so it like reads the request, and then as it forwards it, it will apply the security checks. And this is totally language agnostic because it's a separate binary that basically acts as the entry point of the Docker container that we run our application in.
Cool. My only question on that has to do with localhost, right? Where the local container routing doesn't actually hit that IP tables. Right? How are you handling that in those cases?
So the IP table,
is it even sending 127.0.0.1 out that same?
No. So the when you have a container, you have a totally separate network stack. So when you're creating IP tables, they're actually getting created in the network namespace of the container. They don't conflict with the IP tables that might be set on the host by Docker or other systems. But also that container runtime that I'm talking about that we call netc is actually creating another network namespace in which it's going to run the application. So the app has no choice but to go through that network stack, like that sub-network stack, in order to reach the public internet, which means that we're able to like intercept everything, including like what might go through localhost, which in this case, like 127.0.0.1 is actually another sub loopback interface that is connected to absolutely nothing.
Okay, cool. And so that's all written in Go as well? Is that, you've just basically implemented that library inside of the container?
Pull in the package that we built the checks in.
That's awesome. And you were saying that it's going to be open sourced. You did mention earlier that it was sometime this month. I mean, do you have any more details about that as far as like what the project's name is going to be, anything along those lines that people can watch out for?
Yeah. So the package is we're going to open source the package first because it's one of the dependencies, and so we want to make sure that all the dependencies are public before we ship the project. The package is called NetSec for network security. So it'll be a bunch of Go tools that we use in various services for security checks. This is likely coming out in the next by the end of the month. Just doing like a little bit of documentation around it. The main project that I was just talking about is called netc, and this we're targeting sometime in February for the public release.
Sweet, cool. And so can people, I mean, where would they be notified when this is actually released? Is it just following you on Twitter, or how would they get notified of that?
We'll have a blog post release very likely that comes with it, explaining the story of how we came to build this technology, the couple of use cases that we use it for now, and it'll be posted on Hacker News. So I would say watch for that.
Sweet.
Well, I'm sure everyone's gonna on this. This is watching Hacker News, so it should come up.
And we can, David or myself, when the blog actually comes out, we can shoot it over to you guys, and then whatever the week's episode is, you can just include it as like a follow up in the show notes. So we can try and stay on top of that as well.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. If we see it, we'll tweet it back out and copy it out into send it out our channels as well as talk about it. I'm interested to see the performance and how it actually works. So, great work, man. Let's get it out there and get it used because we're seeing so much SSRF recently.
Actually, it's funny you mentioned the abstraction because just literally like Thursday or Friday of last week, I was just curious about Faraday, the Ruby gem, And it was like, but it came because I was like curious about like the errors that get sent back. And yeah, so it's like Faraday, which wraps, I don't know if I'm saying this right, Typhoeus or something like that. And then that, like when I was really, there was some confusion, I was really digging down, then that ultimately wraps around libcurl. So just for like one HTTP outbound Faraday call, that's the 3 levels of abstraction you're dealing with just on that alone. So yeah, it's difficult.
In this case, it might be even harder to implement these checks because now you need to deal with like a third party, like C library, and then you need to like implement those verification in use. It's like, yeah, it can be a hell.
Absolutely. And having language agnostic solutions is like, that's perfect. So like when you guys do have it released, we'll make sure we follow up on that week's episode about it and give a link out and a shout out back to this episode and all that fun stuff.
Good.
Sweet. Thanks, Ashil. Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know if you're going to stick around or not, but you're welcome to, whatever you want to do. And then we'll jump in. That's kind of like our AppSec minute for this week anyway. And then that's the episode. We're just going to cut it there.
We're done. So Ashil Russell, we definitely appreciate you explaining that, the work you're doing. And we really look forward to not only when you release it, but also like playing with it. And I can tell you like, I work for GitHub. We definitely have interest in this. So yeah, like I'm genuinely looking forward to it, not just from a curiosity perspective, but also from like a job perspective. So stuff that's helpful.
Thanks, Jill.
Thanks for the invite.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Make sure they send you a shirt.
I swear we will send you a shirt.
It's on my list. I have them sitting right here. I just didn't get them out. I slacked. I went skiing. Sorry, guys.
I've got a box right down there. Like that box is from you, Seth, that you sent me, and I just haven't done anything. Holidays.
Yeah, holidays. Family. Gosh, what are we thinking?
Right.
Sweet. So, Leaf, David, welcome. Thanks for bringing Ashil on. Like we've been talking about this for a while. I think we initially, talked when we were down at AppSec USA, if I remember right, bringing you guys on. So it's been a long time coming. I guess first off, we probably want to do kind of at least a little bit more in-depth introductions. Ashil was one of the engineers. If you could just explain kind of what both of you do at Segment, and we'll go from there.
Sure. You want to go?
Yeah. So we're both on the security engineering team. Originally, it was AppSec for both of us, and then we kind of just merged in with like the cloud security aspect of it. So we do all of the different. I don't know.
I love the quotes.
We do all of the security things that need building up.
Yeah, it's kind of just like it turned into like one big ball, whereas like the app is on AWS and there's a bunch of stuff that the app talks to, and so the lines were pretty blurred between like what constituted some like AppSec or like ProdSec functionalities and what ended up being CloudSec. So now it's like a pool of engineers that can kind of just like work on anything within that realm, which is cool because if you want to do one project one quarter and then do something drastically different the next quarter, you're not really confined to a specific team. Like as long as it's benefiting Segment and Segment's customers, you can kind of just like work on whatever makes sense in that realm.
That's kind of the best too, because if you've got like a set of things that you're interested in, and it may not be the same thing this week as it is next week, or this month as it is next month, and like in my opinion, that's the best type of work, is when you have like could be just drastically different things that you're tackling, like that makes you excited because you're choosing to actually do something and choosing to work on something. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, like the stuff that like David and I worked on like last quarter was so different from each other. Like you were doing a bunch of the work around like the encryption. Like I don't know, you should probably just say like 2 sentences instead of me explaining your project. But
So we were working on just encrypting all of our internal like customer data and things like that, and how it's all handled.
Yeah, it's basically just like a diagram of like where everything is going throughout all the segment tubes.
Yeah, which is pretty wild considering it's like we are like, I consider like segment to be one of those kind of like traditional like SSRFs where everyone assumes it's like a microservice hell, it's using the latest like React and like Go. And so it's like building that map was like non-trivial. There was like dozens of teams with their own little map on what they had been building. And so trying to combine those into one world view about how the data flowed through it was kind of a fun challenge.
Yeah, and then contrast that with what I was working on, which was integrating the Dropbox ZXC VBN password strength meter and Troy's Have I Been Pwned API to our password reset, change password, and sign up flow. So that was like a lot of UI work with React. There was a little like backend stuff like doing the connections to that external API. And then a lot of it was honestly like doing testing and like A/B testing with our activation team and stuff like that, because they're obviously very sensitive to changes to our sign-up flow, which makes sense because that's how we get customers that give us money that pay our salaries. So a lot of that work was very different than like the stuff that David was working on. But
I have a question about that. So first is, did you talk to Neil? And also, like, if it's in prod, what has been your sort of your experience with like end user feedback on that?
So I mean, I have talked to Neil about other stuff. The thing I'm going to work on next quarter is 2FA. So I know that that's something that Neil is very well versed in. I'll obviously be at his talk at AppSec California. So yeah, I think he'll be a good resource for that. And then for testing and prod, we didn't really do too much in terms of like getting direct feedback from users, but we have the ability to do A/B testing, and then we call it segment for segment, where we just use segment's own like analytics tracking calls to figure out like where people are getting stuck in various like sign up pipelines, or like wherever through the different like segment processes. So we could see like how many people loaded our sign up page, and then how many people actually like completed sign up. And so we did that with 50% of users getting the new like password strength enabled sign up fields, and then half of the users got the old sign up field, and we were able to show there wasn't a big difference between those two flows. And so that was like our process for that. But prior to that, I did a lot of work with various people from our like project management team, our design team, working directly with some of the engineers that helped me like come up with the concepts. Like the initial concept was something that I wrote on a piece of paper with colored pencils, and was like, hey, this is like what I'm thinking about doing. Like, how is this something that we can turn into a reality with Segment using our design component libraries and stuff like that? And it was actually like a lot easier than I expected, because we have this thing called Evergreen that has a bunch of components in it. And so I was able to just use all these existing components to create the different bars and the alerts and all the different things that you want to give feedback to users. So yeah, I learned a ton of stuff going through that whole process with the engineers at Segment, which was awesome.
I'm actually trying to look up Evergreen now. I'm curious. Oh yeah, I see Evergreen React UI framework. And for those that aren't familiar with why that A/B testing is so important, and Lee, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're impacting even a little bit, basically users using your product because you make like password complexity, for instance, too difficult, no, it's not going to work, because you're going to lose the business money. So
yeah. So we were pretty sensitive to that, and like I think that our security team is pretty practical when it comes to like coming up with security features and like constraints on our users and things like that. So I'm not sure if either of you or our listeners are familiar with the ZXC VPN library, but it rates stuff from 0 to 4, and we allow passwords of 2 through 4 strength. So we don't allow people to choose stuff that's like completely terrible, but like a password that's a 2 is still like not amazing, but it's not something that's like password 1 or like password 1 exclamation or like any of the traditionally okay passwords that fit the like 8-character letter whatever. So we're just mostly trying to avoid people or help people avoid stuff like that. And then the Have I Been Pwned API is just to let them know if it's been something that's been in a previous breach. So we don't actually block on that right now. It's just something that we give people a warning of, but we'd be interested in the future of doing some more A/B testing to see if that's something that would have a negative impact on signups, as if we were to actually like not allow people to use previously breached passwords. But I feel like that is a little bit more difficult to do because a lot of people want to just use the same password everywhere.
What was the scoring system that you mentioned?
What was the library?
It's the bottom like 6 characters of your keyboard. ZXVBN.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that was my Dropbox, and it checks a bunch against like the top 1,000 or so, like most used passwords, and then it checks against like common names and surnames and dates. If you go to the GitHub page for it, it has a link to like tests or something. It's like lowe.github, whatever your guys' is the thing that you let people host stuff on. And then
GitHub pages.
Yeah, GitHub pages. And then there's like a bunch of examples of like what is a 2, 3, and a 4. And it also provides like password feedback. We actually don't show that to users because it was difficult to. Yeah, well, we give them feedback if it's a 0 or a 1, where we say, hey, this is too weak, but we don't give them feedback that's tailored to their password because it was just like taking up too much space in the UI. So yeah, it's a pretty good library. Between that and Troy Hunt's thing, it follows, at least from what I can tell, it follows all the latest like NIST guidelines for passwords, where it says like, allow users flexibility in choosing a password, but like avoid commonly used passwords, avoid, super weak passwords, avoid stuff that's been in breaches, but allow them to do like, 4 random words, even if they're all lowercase, you know what I mean? Like you can just.
It's pretty solid.
Yeah, I think it's pretty solid and it's pretty practical.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'd be interested in as you're getting in there and getting into it is actually just seeing how many of the, like from a statistics perspective, how many passwords people are choosing that are in that breach database, right? You could almost just run those numbers and then, that's how many people couldn't sign up, right? If they were to choose that again.
Right. Yeah. So we have that actually. I don't remember the exact numbers because one of the things that we did use Segment's analytics package to track was so for password change, we tracked like what their old password versus new password was in terms of score. And then we also tracked like breached versus like non-breached passwords. And then we also tracked that for sign up. So the last time I looked, I think it was like 6% or something of people were using like breached passwords for new signups. Now that we've put that in place, that number has maybe changed a little bit in either direction because I looked at this probably like 6 weeks ago. But I mean, if 94% of our new users are picking non-breach passwords, like I actually feel like that's pretty good.
Yeah. I was afraid you were going to say like 40%, right? But
yeah, I think it was.
I guess most of your users are more technical than that, right? You go to Facebook or something like that, and I'm sure it's much worse.
Yeah, like most of the people that are signing up for accounts are developers, and I think like developers, most of them know like, hey, don't do password 1, and like are pretty used to working somewhere that has a security team that probably tells them like,
or even like
make good choices.
Even like the marketing people signing up are probably better off than like someone to grandma.
Yeah.
On Facebook.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. Yeah, Segment's users, I would say, are definitely more technical than like the average person.
Yeah, I mean, and I would say the same thing about GitHub. I always give Ken crap for working at like an AppSec wonderland, right? And definitely depending on where you're at, I would probably classify Segment as one of those as well in comparison with a lot of the organizations that I end up dealing with. So that's where I'm interested in seeing where that that line is.
This would be way tougher to do at a company that's like targeting mostly like B2C, where you're just like dealing with like the average everyday person that's not using this for work and like doesn't really care.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, Ken, have you guys implemented the breach database there?
Yeah. That's why that's why I kind of had asked if Leaf had talked to Neil, because Neil and a couple other folks dealt with that. So
Yeah, I think they have that. I think they have that database duplicated in house, so you're not actually making calls
really?
out to the API.
yeah, you're right. You're correct.
Yeah, we just use the API because it doesn't actually send the password hash. It sends the first 5 characters, and then it returns with all the hashes that match those first 5 characters. And so Troy's API doesn't actually know what those hashes are.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you, because before you had said that it's non-blocking, I was like, oh, how did that work? Because Troy had the outage there. I don't know, a few weeks back, a month back, I think, or something like that. So that's why I was. But you said it's non-blocking, so if it doesn't block, like it's kind of like whatever.
Yeah, so if the request fails or whatever after like some not that long timeout, it just doesn't show the message that would show that the password has been breached. So, obviously not great, but it's like we're not going to stop somebody from signing up because we weren't able to check if their password was breached because an external service was down. So
yeah, and as like time goes on, you can always like implement something later where you like give them warnings or something. Well, okay, maybe not. Okay, but when they go to change their password,
yeah,
I can't store passwords over there.
I know, right? Not in plain text, I promise. I mean, one thing we probably should get to, because we never really talked about your backgrounds. I mean, I know like you're both speaking, you're both involved in OWASP. We got to Seth and I got to meet you at AppSec USA, as a matter of fact. So that was pretty cool. But what we haven't done is get into any of your backgrounds. So if you could each, like starting with you, David, give so a few things. So one is just kind of a breakdown on your background in terms of like how you got, what you've done up to this point, how you got into AppSec is the number one thing we're trying to figure out. And then the second part of that is talk for a couple minutes about your the talk you're going to give at AppSec Cali.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I'm actually working here at Segment because of 3 previous podcast guests. It started out, yeah. It started out when I was going to school and getting my master's degree, and I was looking to get into a project around like active defense. It just kind of seemed like a fun thing to build back then. And after looking around, didn't find anything that really struck my fancy till I came across the App Sensor project, which if y'all aren't familiar with, it's an OWASP project sponsored by John Melton. And so I ended up working with him for about a year on that, implementing a new rules engine in it. So App Sensor, for I guess listeners who don't know, it takes events in from your web application. So you'll put just on a failed login, send to server an event. So another failed login. And after 3 or 4 or so, it can do an action like, hey, lock that user out. So it's just kind of like a whole system to do that. And so I built a rules engine on top of it that allowed you to combine these different sensors and say if someone's failed to log in 5 times and they're from a funky IP, or they've done this, and then they try to download a bunch of stuff, do some sort of insane alerting. It's kind of a cool project to start working on.
Yeah, and to be clear, Seth and I have on many occasions on this podcast and otherwise told folks if you want to get in, if you want to get into the AppSec field, the community, or security in general, that's a great way to do it. Even if it's just a developer job. I mean, anything that basically requires code, helping out on open source projects like that.
Oh, so much. Yeah. I mean, all of my connections I have right now are through some way stemming from an open source project. So I always vouch for that for sure too. When people are trying to get contributors to an open source project.
Go to meetups, write code, help people out.
Yeah, and so it was through John actually that I was just talking to him. He's like, "Oh, you need to meet this guy I know. You need to meet this guy who built this tool, Brakeman." I think you just enjoy talking to him. And so while I was still going to school, I had this like random Skype conversation with Justin. So
That's sweet.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
everybody knows I have the biggest man crush on Justin. So
it was a nice security blind date. Just like open up Skype and like, hi, John told me to talk to you. Like, hello. This was super cool. It was really fun chatting with him. And then I started following him on Twitter. And then so this is about almost like
a year and a half ago.
I guess probably close to 2 years-ish now. Yeah, a year and a half ago. So he tweeted out that he's hosting a meetup at SurveyMonkey. And I was living up in like Sonoma County, and he's down in like the peninsula. So it's like a 2.5-hour drive, but I was like, all right, I need to get out of the house. Like, let's go meet some people. Let's go meet some fellow nerds. And so I went down there, and a couple of people presenting there, it was Flea from Square, which is pretty cool. And then it was Evan Johnson was one of the other people there talking. And so
Evan's a good guy.
And now I'm here at Segment.
And Evan's gone.
And Evan left, yeah. Was it? And I think it wasn't long after you got there too, right?
No, it was about
Like
8 months. Yeah, it wasn't too bad.
Okay, I stand corrected then. I thought for some reason it was shortly after.
I mean, I definitely tried to kick him out quicker.
We chased him out of town.
Yeah, we did our best to get him out here quicker, but
Poor Evan. So, like I said, one of the things we try to always figure out is like, was there? I mean, I don't know that anyone ever is like, oh. I mean, we've had a couple of people that kind of like AppSec specifically because they like found something weird in a website, and then that's what led them to AppSec. But more generally, it's like security, and then somehow ends up in AppSec. So, like from a security, was there any early signs when you were a kid? Is there anything that like happened during your teenage years, or anything like you were like, oh, okay, this is I want to do something where I'm like dealing with security.
Definitely, I think against the grain from a few of the other like podcast guests, like what was it, Stephen Edwards, who's like hacking computers when he's like 6 years old or some shit like that.
Yeah,
like,
that's Stephen
level stuff. But now I just like building things a lot. Ended up getting into computer science in high school. I had a great teacher there. Then
so was that your degree, computer science? Is that what you did for your master's and your undergrad, or was it something else?
Computer engineering and then a master's in computer science.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And it was
and all sorts of paths, right? But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it was when I was going to school too that I had someone from Raytheon come visit. This guy John Wright, and he did this like 48 hours. Like he's there on campus. It's intense. You go like, you want to learn hacking? Come here and learn how to like learn about computer security. Went from like knowing nothing to like playing on back then Backtrack, now Kali. And it was like at that moment I was absolutely hooked.
Yeah, Backtrack. Oh, I haven't heard that name in a while. It's been a bit.
Yeah, that
Cool,
does date you a little bit, but it's all good. It's all good.
You can't say a thing. You're like 5 years older than me, so
Yeah.
5 or 23 years.
23, whatever it is, right? Yeah, it works. Yeah.
Yeah, you guys are the age where you still remember like what your first computer was. It wasn't just some like generic gateway crap that your parents bought. It was like a C64, like something like that.
Actually, I just yesterday.
Nor to die. Yeah.
Actually, yesterday I got asked on the on another podcast about on the Application Security Weekly podcast, which by the way we're going to have Keith, who runs that on next week. But they asked about the computer, and that was actually my answer. I'm like, the first computer I owned was a gateway. We like didn't have money, like it was a gateway PC. Like that's what we had. That's what we could afford. So, but in terms of the first computer I ever worked on, it's more like what you said at school, anyways.
Yeah, if somebody asked me that question, it's like we just had some Dell something or other at my house, and I remember like using Windows 95 and playing that like that weird game with you're in like the hover cars and you collected the flags. I don't know, that game was cool. But the first computer I like really remember like as specific as we had like a Sony Vaio in the XP days that was like periwinkle colored, and it had like the matching monitor and keyboard and mouse.
Did it have like a
It was stylish.
clear see-through square frame?
Yeah, it's very cool for in the day.
Yeah, I'm not even going to go there because I'm feeling really old right now. So we'll just leave it at that. Yeah, my first was a Mac Plus, and it had a 10 meg hard drive. It was pretty sweet.
Big time.
Yeah, big time, right? It had hypercar. Never mind, I won't go into it. It was cool.
That 1960.
Yeah.
50. Poor Seth.
Oh man,
it's already starting, man. It's 2019. We got to kick it off right.
Yeah, I need to go to bed.
In.
It's like almost 5 o'clock. It's dinner time. So yeah, never mind.
Judge Wapner's on. You got to get some tapioca.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, something like that.
Bingo night. We're interrupting it. So just moving on. So David, can you tell us a little bit about your talk at AppSec Cali about I think you're going to be discussing using Zap?
Yeah. So after working on the app sensor, I got involved with the OWASP Zap project, which is like Burp, but free and maybe slightly less performant, some would say. No, it's a great project, open source project. And I've been working on a new feature for it actually for a while that finally got released a little bit ago in the kind of alpha stage. And so for people who are familiar using like Burp or Zap, you'll have your desktop window open and your browser open, and you're kind of going between the two. And what I've built is called like a heads-up display. And so it's actually going to inject code into all the responses returned back to the browser and create this like dynamic overlay over it, so you can access all the tools that you would use in Zap right in the browser.
Oh wow, nice. So you're going to show how you, that's pretty cool. And that's so that's going to be on Friday. You're going to do that talk.
Yeah. So it'll be a lightning talk. I'll go over kind of how it works, what's new about it. And behind the scenes is actually like a lot of different browser technologies that kind of make it happen. You could just use like a browser extension. It's kind of like the first thought, but we wanted to have it be browser agnostic. So it's just less code bases. And so we ended up using a lot of different technologies, including service workers, just like multiple iframes running in it, and it all communicates back to Zap acting as a server.
I know you discussed like the fact that you work on cloud security, and in the talk description it mentions AWS kind of, it mentions AWS infrastructure in there. Like, what is your biggest challenge or biggest challenges with, I guess, if not AWS, just cloud security in general?
Like for me specifically, or like what we deal with here at SIG?
Yeah, like anything interesting that you've sort of seen or dealt with and had to come up with solutions for.
Yeah, and on that project specifically, I don't do too much. But one of the things I'm working on right now is actually we have a bunch of Terraform modules for creating our AWS infrastructure. But I'm creating a set of canned ones for our S3 buckets. So when our developers want to roll out a new S3 bucket, instead of just using one and setting the options themselves, it's like very public bucket, like private with this type of data in it. And so on top of the fact that like now they know explicitly what they're doing, and we've set the safe defaults that we want on there, actually putting in some data classification as well, so that we can do some sort of like automated crawling through that to determine like what sorts of data do we have lying around, to make it easier to kind of determine where bad stuff is.
That seems like it kind of takes the Netflix approach, where their team does like the paved road path and then creates tooling to make stuff easy, but also like secure by default alongside being easy.
100%. Like, I don't know how else you can deal with security at scale. And we actually have a really great ratio of security people to developers. Yeah. But like, I've heard stories of, like 1 to hundreds to crazy stuff like that. And the only way to get that done is to like do your best to
enable your developers to do it correctly.
Yeah, the Netflix team is definitely like a big inspiration for us over here at Segment. We know a lot of the people over there, and we've done like a security date with them where we went down to Netflix and just kind of talked about like the different challenges that our teams are facing. And obviously their challenges are a lot different than ours in most cases, but yeah, it was really good. And they always have really good content at AppSec California. And I know that there's a number of people presenting this year too. So I always try to go to their stuff.
Yeah, I think you guys are going to do this similar thing with our team, as a matter of fact, Segment and GitHub.
Yeah,
we're gonna do like like you said, a security blind date sort of deal. Yeah. So no, but I mean, and this is the thing. Like, I love the idea of that. Because actually, so with Neil and Justin, that's how I met them, was because we had the similar issues with Rails specifically, and like, I think that there needs to be more of that, where teams they're like facing similar challenges all get together and kind of just like, hey, this is what we're, and you know, like, not necessarily a conference, right? Like, that's where some of that happens, sure, but like for
yeah, I feel like
people get up there and
where you meet people to like continue that conversation, because like there's some stuff that like you just can't talk about publicly like that. And I mean, obviously it's great when you can, and I encourage people to talk at meetups and conferences and stuff, but I think nobody's under the impression that you can talk about like every problem that your org faces in a public setting, especially when a lot of conference talks are recorded and stuff. So
yeah, there's certainly generic stuff like password complexity or like SSRF. Like, it's no secret that GitHub has, you know, you allow people to put in URLs for webhooks. Like, you know, I mean, there's some things that are like obvious, but yeah, you're right. There are some things that are just, yeah, you can't talk about them.
It's like, we could share it with you over a video call that's just like our two teams, because it's a bunch of, you know, like-minded security professionals, but we can't talk about it in like a public setting.
Yeah, it's super cool that the industry is like, or I should say the community rather, is acting like a community more and more. Because I mean, I say that because Seth, I mean, I think you can speak to this. When we were certainly like in 2008, 2010, like social networking or social media networking and like what it is now, like people were not as communicative at all.
No, they didn't. Yeah, they didn't discuss a lot of the problems. I mean, even in some of the stuff that we train people on nowadays, like those approaches were just like a closely held secret by consulting companies. Everybody had their own methodologies, and even internal teams, they wouldn't share that stuff out. I know at some point, like there's like a financial, I think they call it like Roadhouse or something like that. It's like the big banks. They do the same thing. Like their security teams all get together and share data, share information, and how they're approaching problems, because they all have similar problems. But like that only came about probably within the last 5 years or so that it's really been that effective. And yeah, back in our fishnet days, Ken, it was really just a closely held secret, right? Whatever problems you were dealing with, the companies seem to see that as a secret or as some sort of intellectual property, but that's gone away, which is a good thing.
Or in some cases, actual intellectual property. That's a shout out to your man, Gary, but
yeah, I have stories about that, but again, it's probably not something we want to get into on the podcast.
Probably not. So moving on, Leaf, let's get into your backstory a little bit. And then if you just, again, like kind of give us the point at which you think you were like, hey, security is going to be the thing I'm going to do. And then also just a little bit about your talk at AppSec Cali.
Yeah. So I was always like interested in computers from a young age. And for some reason, my parents wouldn't let us have like an N64 or PlayStation 1, but we could play video games on the computer, which didn't make any sense, because then I just played like Diablo 2 and Counter-Strike. And
like way worse games.
Yeah, a bunch of shit that's way worse. It's like I would have just been playing Mario Kart if you just let me get an N64. And instead it was like, all right, I'm just going to play Counter-Strike with a bunch of weirdos on the internet for hours.
Instead of bananas and fake made up little mushrooms, you got like exactly hanging out and blood and yeah.
Yeah, and so that's kind of like how I got interested in computers and I guess like technology as a whole. And then a couple of like the early like things that I look back on that were like, you know, beginnings of like a security career, I guess, were I had a Razor cell phone. If you remember those from forever ago, the Motorola.
Yes, the Motorola little ones. They're like this big. Yeah.
Yeah, the flip.
At that time, they wrote custom firmware for every phone so that all of their phone firmwares would look the same. So if you switch from like an LG to a Motorola to whatever, you'd be familiar, and like the text messages and everything would look the same. But their firmware sucked and it was really slow. And so I read about online like flashing the Razor with the original stock Motorola firmware. And you had to go through all these steps to like get the carrier settings to work again and like be able to send text messages and like SMS and like all that stuff. And so that was like one of the first things that I like hacked, even though it was literally just like me following a guide that somebody else had written. Like I was not contributing in any way. But that was like one of the first things that I like look back on. And then another one was kind of like a combination of like hacking and physical security where, like I was saying, I played a lot of computer games growing up. And when I was in high school, my dad was like, okay, you have to do your homework first before you can play video games. I was like, okay, that makes sense. Like, got to do schoolwork first. That's important. But the problem is sometimes I'd finish my homework before he got home, and then I couldn't get on the computer. And I thought that wasn't fair because I was like, I did my end of the bargain. Like, now I get to play Counter-Strike. And so we had an office in our backyard, and he would hide the key, and then I would call him and be like, hey, I did my homework. And then he'd tell me where the key was for that day. And then one day I copied the key, and so then I would just go and play. And then I accidentally like left the key in like a pocket or something that got washed, figured out that I had the key, took the key away. And then I got I got a laptop, and then I would connect to the router like from inside the house. And then he figured out that I was doing that. And so the next logical step was like going on Google and typing in like how to hack Wi-Fi. And so
oh, that's awesome.
Back in the day, Backtrack 3, and I hacked my neighbor's Wi-Fi to get the Wi-Fi password.
Was it web?
Logged on to the Wi-Fi after after I did my homework or whatever. And I think at that time I was like playing World of Warcraft or something. But and then I would do that. So that was like my first
knocking down your neighbor's web.
Yeah.
Was it the web one where like you've got like 3 different terminals open to run? I forget which program you would run on Backtrack to do that, but it was like you had like 3 different terminals to what was that?
Airmon NG was like one of the steps. Yeah. Then you had to have like a specific Wi-Fi card that like could do.
Yeah, you have initially it was those Orinoco Gold cards. Yeah.
Yeah, I had one of those. I'm pretty sure. So
that's commitment. You really wanted to play.
Yeah.
Well, it was Warcraft. It's basically just like everything on steroids, right? That was the greatest game.
There, I think sometimes I would try and like keep the window open and like hop through the window, like go on the computer and stuff. So yeah, it was a mixture of physical and network security. Yeah, I had like
don't
my alpha card.
There you go, the alpha cards. Yep.
Yeah, that's right.
And then I don't know. From there, I went to school at UCSB. Originally, like didn't know what I wanted to do, but knew it was going to be like something science related. And so I took my second quarter there. I took chem, math, physics, and computer science. And I honestly had no idea what computer science was. I was just like, I like computers, and this has science in it. And that was the only class that I liked doing the homework for. And so I was like, oh, maybe I should just have this be my major because this is the only thing that I actually like doing so far. So yeah, ended up with a computer science degree. Partway through my senior year, I started working at a security consulting company in Santa Barbara, Redspin. I don't know if you've heard of it. Probably not. It was like
yes, definitely.
Okay, yeah, because like David Shaw and yeah, so yeah, Jimmy worked there at one point. He's been a guest. Jason Haddix worked there like way before I was there, and so I worked there for a couple of years. Did everything from like social engineering to on-site engagements at like banks and hospitals. But the thing that I liked the most was doing web app assessments, because like the other stuff, I don't know, it was fun, but it was also kind of boring because it was a lot of the same stuff every single time, where it's like your Windows patching is horrendous, like your third-party patching is horrendous, like you have a bunch of things that have like default passwords, but like none of that was really something that like anybody who worked at those companies built. Like, you know, you could argue that they built the network or whatever, but I liked working the web app jobs better, because it's like you got to talk with the developers that like actually built this thing, and like work with them directly to like help them understand like what these vulnerabilities were, and you were like finding things that like potentially nobody else had ever found before in that app specifically. Like obviously you're finding like cross-site scripting and like the, you know, common stuff, but it's not like just running Nessus on a network and having it like do everything for you and then you like run Metasploit. And so that's kind of was like my first like actual security job, was doing consulting at Redspin, and I did that for a few years.
Yeah, that's always the fun part, is that like tooling. I mean, Seth and I talk about this a bit in the course, which is like tooling is great as like as augmenting your effort, sure, but like it's really fun, and it's really, that's where the meat of it gets done, is in that manual, in that time where you're using some creativity and you're using your brain to figure some stuff out. So
yeah, and so that would be like the end of the engagement, right? Is like, okay, I've found all the easy stuff with Nessus. Like now let's try and like use Metasploit, or like start looking at some of these things that have default creds and see like where you can pivot from there. But that's like a fraction of like what you end up doing for most companies, because it's like you could get hacked a million different ways because you just are so soft once you get onto the network that, you know, none of that stuff really matters, because like it's 2013 and you're still vulnerable to like MS-08 or MS-08067, like the configure stuff. So yeah, I don't know. That part was kind of got old. But yeah, from there, I actually moved into a sales engineering role at BugCrowd. So I was like employee like 20 or something, and so I helped a bunch of companies like implement and run bug bounty programs. I worked there for a couple of years, and then about a year ago, I joined Segment. So this is my first time being on a like defensive security team, and you know, working with like the same people all the time. And I like it a lot. It's good to be able to partner with engineers over the long term and like actually see stuff progress, versus consulting, where it's like, okay, you're, you know, working with them for like 2 weeks, and you know, you don't really get to see like that much change. Like you're just pointing out a lot of problems. But it was cool. Like I did like consulting in the sense that I got to see how so many different companies do different things. And I think it was a really good thing to get exposed to like early in my career, because I got to see how 100 different companies like do stuff to, you know, some were great, some were not very good, some were kind of okay in one area but bad in another. So I think that the variety of consulting is cool and is a good experience, but I prefer what I'm doing now.
I feel like to be a good consultant, you really should play defense, because I will tell you, like, from Seth mentioned Fishnet, from Fishnet to then going and working internally at Living Social to then going back out and doing consulting, like what I would report on and how I would approach the reports from between Fishnet and the next gig as a consultant, totally different mindset, and like what actually matters and what will be actionable, and also how you write up the report for recommendations. A lot of things change. They improve.
Yeah, it's like the difference between like a good bug bounty researcher and a bad one is like the bad ones just like copy and paste some references and like complain about stuff that like nobody at a real organization would ever fix, and then like the good ones actually like take the time to like understand your application and like find stuff that actually matters, and like potentially give some like good recommendations, and like that's actually tailored to what they found, versus just like generic cross-site scripting articles that like nobody's gonna read.
Or like you're using cookies that never expire, but I haven't factored in that it's a client-side cookie. That's how that works.
Yeah,
there's other mitigating factors, things like that.
Yeah. No, I like I go back and forth, right? Like I also think that there's advantages to being a consultant before going into the defensive side, right? Exactly what you're saying, Leaf, as far as seeing so many different ways of doing things, both good and bad. It makes a lot of difference when you're actually talking to internal teams and they're proposing different solutions from a security perspective, because you're able to actually give them, hey, guess what? I've seen somebody go down this road before, and that's not where you want to go, right? Just because of the problems that exist out there. I mean, I'd almost recommend that everybody kind of flip back and forth at some point in their career, just because of the perspective that it gives you, right? If you get stuck too long in one or the other, it kind of feels like you lose a little bit of that perspective.
I think if I were to do consulting again, I'd want to go somewhere where you're like partnered with companies for a longer period of time, to actually like focus on improving like a portion of their security program or something like that, versus like just doing, like 1 week web app engagements,
Yeah.
where it's like, okay, like give me the creds, like I'll have a report to you by Friday, and like we'll do a wrap up call, and then like maybe I'll talk to you around the same time next year, or like maybe I'll never talk to you again.
Those kind of managed services are becoming increasingly more popular with both the consultant as well as the client.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if I look back over like, my career as a consultant, right, that was initially what we did at Fishnet, probably about the same time you were doing that at Redspin. But it's definitely gotten more towards, hey, guess what? We need a long-term partner here. Needs to be somebody that understands the application and can talk to our developers. Because if they can't, then it's like a compliance check, and the value just really isn't there. And the interest from my perspective isn't there as a consultant either, because it's, hey, if you're not going to fix this, yeah, I'll find all these things, and then next year I'll come back and bill you again. But it's really not that interesting to me.
Yeah, and I think that if you're doing that kind of consulting, it is much more similar to like being on a blue team than like what people traditionally think of as consulting work. So I think that's like a good blend, where it's like you're almost like just a short-term member of the internal team versus like an outside assessor.
Yep. Yeah, I'd much rather have like a, even if it is the same number of hours, but it's spread over 2 months versus a single week. At least at that point, there's some rapport, and you're actually helping them out, and you're, reviewing their fixes and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
interesting. Yeah. So what are you doing? I mean, we've been going for over an hour already. This always goes quick, but so what are you speaking on at AppSec Cali?
Sure. So my topic is working with developers for fun and progress instead of fun and profit. And it's just talking about like the different things, or some of the different things that we've done at Segment to try and build great relationships with our developers. Because I think that, a lot of people at modern-ish security orgs have realized like that's the only way you're going to be able to build a relatively secure product, is like having good relationships with all the different engineering teams, because it's not like we're pair programming with every developer all the time. Like we don't have enough people to do that, and we don't want to do that. So you got to just work with developers and have them like, be able to make good decisions on their own. Some of it's like enabling them with like some of the stuff David was talking about, where it's like you give them like secured by default configurations, or something like the NetSec project that Ashil was talking about, where it's like, okay, you have a foundational team that solves this problem, and then nobody else has to worry about it. So we talk a little bit about like our training program for AppSec training. I'm going to talk a little bit about like the partnership that I had with our activation team for the password strength thing, and kind of how to replicate something like that. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm also working with one of our other teams to do MFA next quarter, and so like how to lay the groundwork for a good like cross-functional project like that. And then a couple other things that I've talked about at other conferences that will get like mixed back in. So yeah,
Cool.
It's all about kind of like the like engineering culture side of like running a good security program.
Yeah. I mean, Ken and I have talked about that a few times, as a security, as an application security or project team, those relationships and actually building that up. But it'll be interesting to hear how it works with you, and where you're taking it there at Segment. Because I've seen it work and I've seen it not work, right? Both as a consultant and internal team, right? It just like, it seems like everybody makes the same mistakes, telling developers no or forcing a tool set on them or whatever. So it'll be interesting to hear how it is and how it's working out for you.
Yeah, and it's one of those topics that I think that even if it's been given at 100 different conferences, just like hearing how a different company or even like a different person at the same company has done things that have like gone well or not as well is valuable. Like if there was somebody else that was giving the exact same presentation at AppSec California, I would go to it because their experience is going to be different than what mine is at Segment. So it's kind of like, some people are like, oh, there's been a million times where somebody's given the like building an AppSec program talk or like building a security program or whatever, but it's like everybody does that different and every company is different. So, just because somebody from one company and somebody from another company gives the like, hey, here's how I built a security team, it's like, that doesn't mean that it isn't interesting for me to hear from multiple people.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at the schedule of AppSec Cali, I think one of the things I like the most about it is it's like practical. It's not like 1,000 new talks on, or 1,000 new talks on like, or 1,000 talks on new XSS vectors or something like that. This is actually like, here's how you do XYZ in various like your program or,
Yeah. One of the things that I love to say about security conferences is like, I love going to quote unquote like boring talks where it's just like not a sexy topic, but it's something that like literally every company has to deal with. And it's just, exactly what you just said. It's like, I actually really don't care that much about a talk that's like, here's 100 like XSS vectors. It's like, I'd rather go listen to somebody that is talking about like how company X does Y. So that's what my talk's about. I think one of the big takeaways is like, we focus on something that I actually heard at the one of the Netflix talks last year from Asta and I think Thomas, and it's the concept Patrick, yeah. Sorry, Patrick, if you're listening. And it's the concept of security judgment, and that's like one of the things that we love here at Segment is just the concept of like, we're not going to be able to teach you like everything that you should know as a developer. Like we don't even know everything. Like I would have done a way worse job of explaining like Ashil's project, which is why we brought him on. But it's like, we just want people like when they're working on stuff or doing code reviews or whatever, we just want them to know like, when to tag us in. And as long as they can identify like, hey, this thing is something that, doesn't look right, or this is something that, I'm not super confident in that's in this like, realm of security, we're always available to take a look at stuff, whether it's doing like a full security design review or just like answering questions in Slack. So I think that's, like one of the big takeaways is like getting your relationship with every developer / team to the point where they're, more than happy to, come to your table or whatever and share what they're working on.
You're right, because you can codify certain things and say like, if this is going on or something like this is going on, open up a review or something like that. But then there's that other part that's just like kind of almost have to give people like here's, if this makes your spidey senses tingle, like then you should talk to us.
Too many rules of what triggers a review. People are just going to read none of them, and so it's like you want to have a set of rules that like covers all the really bad stuff, and then you want to have people kind of know like for the medium bad stuff, like that should just trigger something in their mind where they're like, oh, I'm going to go talk to David or Leaf or somebody else from our team.
I know we've tried super hard to make sure developers know that we're taking like practical approaches to security, because I think half the time people don't want to reach out because they don't want the extra headache, because it's like no one wants to go ask for more work on their project. And like one of the things that I've been doing lately is if I can't explain or convince the developers of why the security measure is needed, then like maybe like we don't need, like that's on me. Because like sometimes like, oh, like, here's a great like defense and death measure, we should add this. Like, well, do we really need that? I mean, at that point, aren't we screwed? Like, all right, no, let me like try to explain like why I think like that actually does provide real practical security.
Yeah, and I think something similar to that is like in our vulnerability management program, like whenever we get something either from a pen tester or from that we find internally or bug bounty or whatever, part of the fields that we have to fill out is like the severity description, which is like, it needs to be able to be understood by an engineering manager, a project manager, and an individual contributor on that team. And they need to be able to read that and be like, this is why I should care about this vulnerability, and this is why this vulnerability matches like whatever that severity is. And so, yeah, there's definitely a big focus here on like, you need to be able to explain something in a way that a developer can understand and take action on, even if you're not prescribing like a specific fix or something. You should have like some remediation criteria, and like you should do a reasonable amount of work on our side to make it so that the developers that we're interacting with can, relatively quickly understand like, why is this a problem, and like, what should I be doing?
Yeah, and that's not necessarily a no-brainer, right? There's people that are really good at explaining that to developers and talking to developers at that level, but it's not everybody's, in everybody's skill set, especially when they start down that path.
Yeah, and it's definitely a little bit of like, it's a combination of art and science too, because it's part of it is like, yes, you need to have resources available and links to stuff and references and whatever if people do want to really like dig into this. But then at the same time, it's like you also need a shortened version where somebody can read like 2 sentences and understand like why this is a problem for Segment's customers.
Yep. Yeah, it's got to be succinct enough and descriptive enough in that 2 sentences that somebody can understand it enough to make sure that the impact is there and like, oh, all right, I see that. SQL injection, they can dump my database, right? Okay, and then talk them through that. Yeah, I'm interested to hear, right? And like what you were saying as far as like going to the non-interesting talks, right? I can't tell you how many of those like 0-day talks that I go to that are just completely a waste of time, right? At security conferences in general. What?
Half the time I can't understand them because they're talking about like some technology I'm not familiar with, and there's like, that's the tough thing about like the super technical talks is like, you want to do some amount of level setting so that people that don't know anything like kind of know what's going on, but then the people that actually are experts in that field are like, this is so boring, like you spent 20 minutes talking about this thing that everybody knows, and it's like, well, everyone doesn't know that. And then like the last 10 minutes you get into like whatever the actual like interesting part for like experts in that field is, and like I don't really know what the solution to that is. I kind of feel like some of that stuff like it's better fit for like a blog post where you can say like, hey, skip this section if you already are familiar. And like obviously that sort of research is really cool if you're somebody who understands like whatever topic you're going to, but I'm not really like a security researcher. Like I'm not super well versed in like all these different technologies. Like I would go to a talk that's about exploits in like a technology that like we use and that I understand, but I'm not really somebody that's going to go to something like an IoT talk where it's like, okay, I like, totally owned this system. I'm like, I don't really know what all these protocols are. But like if one of the talks that we accepted for AppSec California is all about attacking GraphQL. And that's something that's here at Segment. So it's like, I'm going to go to that talk because I'm going to try and learn stuff to bring back to where we work and like help defend against like attacks that the person talks about in that conference presentation. So
cool. Yeah. Well, good. Yeah, that's it. I don't know. I mean, we're looking forward to AppSec Cali, obviously. We've been talking about it for a while, and outside of the training aspect, just the number of people that are there and the talks that come out of it are always pretty good. I've never been to it before, so I'm pretty excited. I know Ken's been there a couple of times. Oh, good.
I've been there for three times, I think. It was pretty awesome.
Yeah, I've been to every one. I was one of the like founding organizers when I lived in Santa Barbara and helped with the Santa Barbara OWASP chapter. So it's definitely one of my favorite conferences, and I look forward to it every year.
Awesome. Cool. Well, yeah, we have been going for hour and 15 at this point. I think we'll probably try and wrap it. We do try to keep it around an hour, but it's been great to have both of you on. I mean, if you're interested, we'd love to have you both on again sometime or separately. Right. Like Dave, I'm interested in like kind of the Z attack proxy stuff and the work that you're doing there. I think there's a deep dive that we could do on that as well. That would be really interesting.
Yeah, I love that. That'd be fun.
Cool. I mean, Ken, do you have anything, kind of last minute before we wrap up for tonight?
No, actually, not a whole lot. We got the AppSec Cali training coming up, and then we got to figure out where we're going to go after that. There's all kinds of conferences, and I haven't figured out yet. I don't think either of you have figured out where we're going to attend. I think Loco Moco Sec in April, very likely, but
we'll be at B-Sides SF because that's in our backyard, and I think you're speaking.
Oh, yeah, I was speaking at B-Sides, yeah.
Yeah, so if anybody's around at B-Sides SF, segment teams there.
Cool. And
so
then how can people...
Oh, no, I was going to say I also put in your Twitter links, but Seth, you're getting to that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask is how can people reach you online? Like where can they find you?
Yeah, so my DMs are open. If you have any questions, if you want to chat or whatever, like most of the InfoSec world, I have a Twitter tab open most of the day. So that's how I get all my news other than like this and risky business. So yeah, that's probably the best way to reach me. Or like if you see me at a conference and recognize me or whatever, just come up and say hi. But that's a little bit more restrictive than Twitter. So yeah.
Cool.
Yep, on the Twitter as well. David_Scribonia.
That's super easy to spell, right, Dave?
Yeah. So
we'll put the link in the description. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, and I'm Leaf_Dreisler, which is also super easy to spell. But yeah, I'm sure there will be links in the show notes or whatever.
Sweet.
For sure.
Good call. Well, thanks again for joining. Don't drop off. We're gonna, we'll end the broadcast here in a minute. But it's been great to have you. Appreciate the support, and then also bringing us out for AppSec Cali. We're super excited about that. And,
yeah, I'm excited to take the training.
Yeah, cool. All right. Thanks everybody.
guys.
Thanks, guys. Bye.